Guruve Gaura Chanjaya Radhikaya Tadale Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tada Bhaktaya Namo Namaha Vanchakalpaturubhyascha Kripa Sindhuveva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Shri Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Offering my Dandavat Pranama to the lotus feet of my Guru Parapadma, Nityalila Pravishtam Vishnu Pada Paramahamsa, Ashto Tarasata Srimad Srila Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. Also unto my Param Guru Devs, Nityalila Pravishtam Vishnu Pada Paramahamsa, Ashto Tarasata Srimad Srila Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada. Also unto Acharya Keshri, Srila Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Goswami Maharaj. Also unto our Rupanuga Guru Varga. So, I am answering a question that one devotee sent, but just as I don't know what, like in general, I'm more inclined to deal with answering questions which will be more geared towards direct spiritual topics. And by answering those kind of questions on a forum like this, we all are benefited because many senior devotees and devotees who are much more advanced in the practice of bhakti than myself, they can also help by commenting and by clarifying things that I may say wrong or something like that. But these kind of questions, they're more relative than they are about spiritual life. But at the same time, I understand that there are practical issues and people may want to ask a question that deals with a practical issue. Also, because it was something that I posted, which was the basis of the question, then I felt some obligation to answer it. And not begrudgingly, I'm not unhappy or anything. I just, in general, I think that questions that are more geared directly towards our practice and our aim and objective in bhakti, I think it just is better. Just my personal taste thing. But I did post about my former life space, which was my career in law enforcement. And it was generated because I was tuning into the news and I saw a documentary, I guess to be aired or it was already aired, I'm not sure, but it was about a case that I happened to have worked on back in 2002 or something like that. And it was a very significant time in that part of the career. And sometimes I'm just, pretty amazed at the diversity of things that have happened in my life. I've had kind of two careers simultaneously in law enforcement and in music. And, now in my, elder years, by fortune of Guru and Gauranga, I don't have to really put so much attention into anything else except, trying to do bhajan life. But sometimes these memories of things that were significant sort of hallmarks in that section of my life may pop up. So long story short, the devotee asked me a question based on that about reconciling different kinds of secular work with being a devotee. And he particularly asked about whether or not it was challenging to be in law enforcement and be a devotee. And then he brought up some other fields, like people who have to work in situations where there may be some inconsistency with the practice of bhakti. I don't have the question in front of me, so he did enumerate a couple of fields. I know one of them was with science, and he was talking about like the vaccine and all these kind of things. So I mentioned overall, just in a brief response, that a lot of things that go on in an individual devotee's life and their unfoldment are based around the uniqueness of their circumstance. I know devotees have come from varied backgrounds in many, many fields. Once coming into Krishna consciousness, their attention and focus was on advancing in bhakti, and they understood their former profession or current profession even to be simply a part of their being able to maintain themselves in the material world. And obviously there may be some cases where reconciliation of elements of that profession have to be dealt with. I remember we do have a very good devotee friend, and he's a scientist and a policy advisor at the time, and he actually asked my Guru Parapadma about a particular scientific thing that was going on. I believe it was about cloning or something like that. And my Guru Parapadma said, in the material world, you will get people, of all levels of consciousness, and, where the domain is dominated by people of a certain consciousness, they may do certain things that, we don't want to partake in, right? But it may be in the arena where we work. And so, that's something that has to be reconciled. So, in this particular case, in my direct case, he was asking me about my own reconciliation of being in law enforcement and being a devotee. And I never really had an issue with it because two things. One is probably somewhere in my karmic portfolio, there is a natural feeling of being protective. I've always been like that about my family, about people in general. One of the things that was the genesis of me even getting involved in law enforcement was I was driving in Washington, D.C., and I actually witnessed as I was driving past, and I was unable to turn around, a young lady being, she was pregnant at the time as well, she was being robbed at knife point. And actually I came to find out later just by inquiry that the person robbing her was her boyfriend or significant other, whatever, who happened to be on drugs and, so on and so on. And I just remember that helplessness of having driven past and being unable to turn around because we were on a main road, and I remember getting on the phone and so forth and so on. But, it's something in my nature that's kind of protective in general, and always has been. And so I don't even think choose law enforcement necessarily as a first choice career idea. I had been preaching in Africa for so many years, and when I came back to the States, there was the need to find a way to maintain myself, and so I thought of various things, and just somehow or another circumstances revolved into a place where that ended up being, something that became my job, and later on, it's extended out into a career. So, and then when I met my Guru Parapadma, originally I met my Gurudev, Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj, actually in 1986, but I did not have real correspondence and significant contact until I started writing in about 1992, 93, something like that, 1992, I believe. And then in 1996, actually, I saw Gurudev. And Gurudev told me the story that he was a police officer in his former life during his Acharya Leela. And he once asked me, actually, and, how was your job? And I said, oh, Gurudev, sometimes it's very challenging, which it was. I mean, I've been in various sections of law enforcement, and some things are more challenging than others, obviously. He said, yeah, I was a police officer as well, but I never forgot Krishna. So, of course, I immediately digested that, of course, he's a pure devotee, and therefore, of course, that would never happen to him because he was, a eternal associate of Bhagavan. But in my case, there were challenging times, different investigations, different kinds of things that, wore sometimes on the consciousness. But I never had given up my Southern bhajan life. So I would always do a morning program, always chanted my rounds. I always found ways to preach as well, both to colleagues who were there, who I worked intimately with, and sometimes in general, even to people whom, I actually had to arrest in some cases, especially some younger people who I felt maybe going down a wrong track, and taking some time to kind of mentor them from a spiritual perspective, but with practical advice. So a lot of times those things would happen as well. So, but bottom line, I never saw any contradictory elements in what I did for a living versus my inner life. And of course, I took it that it is Guru Ngoranga's mercy that career allowed me to have a facility to try to, in my elder years here now not coming up, they're there, to be able to have a dedicated time to bhajan life and still be able to have some way to maintain myself. And my wife also had a career, obviously she was a dentist, and so practically speaking, from the question you asked about me personally, that's the answer. As far as other people and various careers, you'd probably have to do the same thing. You probably have to speak to individuals in those fields, get a sense of how they reconcile or how they deal with what it is that they do, and reconcile that with their devotional life. I know that there are some fields which are more challenging, so forth and so on, and how it may be difficult for a third party or someone looking from another perspective to reconcile certain fields with being in devotional life. But again, I think it's always best to talk to the person who's directly involved in that field, get a sense of where they are with it, and whether or not it was something that was born of a necessity, or whether or not it's something that they also have the same perspective that perhaps you do if you don't have a positive view of it and you think, maybe they are trying to change. So, in other words, this kind of question is really kind of individual. There is an overarching consideration that we don't want to do things like, we would never say that, okay, yeah, we can reconcile working in a slaughterhouse, or we can reconcile working in a situation in which direct principles are being broken, being like if I was in law enforcement to ask, me to come and guard a brothel or something, like that. And there's even times when I've done work in executive protection or something, and if it wasn't something I felt comfortable with as far as the client was concerned, maybe they were involved in, some kind of illicit activity or something, right? And, like a lot of musicians and stuff may be, and I would just, humbly say no. It's not something that's going to resonate with me. So that's not a job I would have taken, right? On the other hand, I've done, protection jobs for people like Winnie Mandela. Winnie Mandela came here and was not entitled to, at that time, State Department security. And, they contracted a friend of mine who was also on the police department, and we together worked that detail. Anyway, so the point being, yeah, I mean, it's an individual thing, and you have to reconcile, on a case-by-case basis, but there are very big, generic no-nos, obviously, that's not going to be very conducive to consciousness. I know many devotees were in the arts, certainly before they came, and the arts community can be, externally, it looks like it's very benign as far as being detrimental to bhakti, but some of the inner core of entertainment life is really gross, for lack of a better word. So, but again, everything is individual. And the main thing is, of course, the scriptural saying that we should always remember Krishna and never forget him under any circumstances. And there are times when even in devotional life, just the life of a preacher, you find yourself in circumstances that are pretty challenging. I remember a story that I was told by Shriman Brahmananda Prabhu of his first couple of days arriving in Nigeria. Of course, I spent many, many years in Africa preaching, and one of the stories he told me when I got there was that his first night or two that he was there, he had not yet established a place. So he had to stay in a hotel, and he later found out, he said he was in his room, and it was extremely hot, and when he would open the window, the mosquitoes were very bad, and so forth and so on. And so he kind of snuck up to the top of the building, and there was a roof place, and nobody was up there, and he kind of thought at least it'll be a little cooler up here, and maybe it won't be so harassing by the mosquitoes because it was a little high up, and so forth. But as he was on the top, he looked over, and he could see a continual stream of like men and ladies coming in, and then he put two and two together, figured out it was a brothel, right? But he was there, right, with nowhere to stay, and he was beginning the mission of Mahaprabhu in West Africa. So even as preachers, we run across dynamics sometimes that are unfavorable. He told me another story about being in one country where, because of the religious tradition there, Islamic tradition there, they did not, so much welcome Vaishnavas at that time. And he found himself in a circumstance where he had tilak on, and somebody actually spit in their hand and wiped the tilak off, but he could not, Brahmananda can be pretty volatile, and he was, fairly large body devotee, but he could not make any response to that. He certainly had to demonstrate great humility because it would have caused so many more problems. So even as a preacher, we could find ourselves in circumstances while preaching that may not be always the most favorable conditions. So the principle is always remember Krishna and never forget him, and also to realize that whatever it is we're doing, we should always be doing it with the aim of utilizing whatever rewards come from that thing as a means to advance bhakti. And that begins, of course, with advancing our own lives in bhakti, because if we're not situated, then how can we help others to become situated? So I didn't want to, I know, Prabhu, you've seen other questions and answers, and I didn't want you to feel like I didn't want to answer your question simply because it dealt with something that, was not, quote, directly spiritual, but it does have some practical implications in spiritual life. So, and secondly, I thought it may help someone else as well, because maybe somebody else has a question about reconciling, how to exist in the material world according to your profession or your job or whatever, and reconcile that with being a devotee. So that could be a whole topic of discussion, but unless somebody else really writes about it or it comes up more significantly or regularly, I think that perhaps, hopefully, this was good enough. So Dandavad Prabhuji, thank you for your question, and I hope that the answer is okay. You can always write back to me, and we can discuss it further if not. Jai Dandavad Pranam devotees. Jai Radhe Radhe.